So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this second in the sequence of a number of outreach events performed by EFRAG and the EFRAG Reporting Lab on the dedicated task force on preparatory work on EU non-financial reporting standards. Today's outreach is focusing primarily on the Nordics, and hence you will see speakers and panelists coming from the Nordic region. I know that there is going to be a number of outreach events. The first happened yesterday with Spain, and I know already tomorrow there will be another outreach event. First of all, I would like to thank the co-host and organizing organizations to this outreach event, Finance Finland, Finance Denmark, the Danish Institute of Auditors, and of course my own employer, the Confederation of Danish Industries, have also invested in this project. We are very fortunate today to have as well for the introduction Patrick de Cambuur, who is the chairman of this task force. We have been working intensely over the last period of time since September to try to find the landscape and to come to a point where we can hopefully by the end of January produce some recommendations. Before handing over the floor to Patrick, though, I'd like to also welcome our friends and co-organizers from Finland. I know that both Michael and Christina is on location in Finland, and I don't know whether you can briefly just say hello from Finland.
Yes, hello. My name is Christina Vares-Vartiovaara, working for OP Asset Management. So hello on my part. I will be co-hosting today's outreach.
And good morning, Mikael Niskala here, and I'm supporting also the moderating and making a wrap-up at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And together with me in the room, and I think for those of you who have been working from home for quite a long time, just being able to see two other faces physically is very welcomed, at least here. And I know Patrick would have loved if the entire task force could have been together. But together with me in the room here, I have Birgitte Mogensen from the Danish Institute and Susanne Stormer. I don't know whether you just want to briefly say hello or...
Yeah, good morning. You will hear more of us later on. Yes, good morning. We're looking for this morning and to have a lot of discussions.
So this is the moderating team that we are trying to take you through the agenda for today. We will finish at 12, and I will do my utmost best together with the other moderators to ensure that we meet that timeline. We have 5 themes during the day. We may be flexible on the individual timing on the themes, but we will make sure that we bring you to the end. Hopefully you will see a polling question at the moment on your screens, just to know who is listening in, to know the backgrounds of the audience. We're going to have polling questions during the day as well. So while you do the polling, I'll come back to the results after we have had the introduction from Patrick de Cambuur. But I think without further ado, welcome to all of you, and I'll hand the floor over to you, Patrick, so you can give some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you to the Nordic task force members who are moderating this event today. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure being with you this morning for this outreach event. One, as Christian mentioned, 1 out of 7 events the EFRAG Lab is organizing to make sure that the task force on preparatory work on the EU non-financial reporting standards or standard setting would receive input from stakeholders. It's a crucial step in our process. And today, we are very, very happy to have this discussion with the Nordic countries' stakeholders. As you may know, the task force has a very tight schedule. Since, as Christian mentioned, we have a deadline which is the end of January. So it's very, very near. However, we wanted to seek views from stakeholders. As I mentioned, it's a crucial step. Now is the right time. Of course, there is a combination of, it is difficult sometimes to seek views on our own views that are not totally finalized. But if we do that too late, then it's lacking purpose. So the right time is now. We are sufficiently advanced to share our preliminary views on many points, but these points are not yet finalized and some are still open. So rest assured that the views expressed during this outreach will be duly taken into account in the upcoming weeks when we finalize our recommendations to the Commission. First of all, I would like to set the scene. The preparatory work on EU non-financial reporting standards is one of 3 pillars of the EU non-financial reporting project, which is currently progressing. The other 2 pillars are the revision of the directive itself. I think you're familiar with that. And by the way, it was one of the difficulties, but also one of the interests of the task force, which is to have to work on possible standards when the directive itself is not finalized, because the Commission at the moment is drafting the project, and that will be with the deadline, which is the end of March. The other pillar is the possible evolution of the governance of EFRAG. As you know, EFRAG is a public-private partnership which has been modified 6 years ago following the Maystadt reform to give more public accountability. And now, but is focused on the endorsement of financial reporting standards prepared by the ISB. So, of course, this is the place where interconnection would happen. And as a consequence, the chairman of EFRAG has been given an ad personam mandate to analyze the possible evolution to governance should EFRAG be the standard setter for non-financial reporting standards. This, of course, needs to be put in perspective. The current directive, which I call NFRD1, is an important step. And I think that everybody may agree on the fact that it was groundbreaking when it was adopted, and it has stimulated a lot of interest, a lot of activity, and a lot of implementation practices. However, there is a general consensus which was demonstrated during the consultation conducted by the Commission in spring. There is a consensus also to say that we are not where we should be. So I consider NFRD1 as a first step, and I think that most people would consider the same. The key issue today is that we are lacking comparability, we are lacking relevance, we are lacking understandability. The non-financial information is very diverse and scattered in a number of places in the corporate reporting, and that's an issue. And there is a significant pressure from stakeholders, and in particular investors, to go to a much clearer landscape. During the assessment phase of our work, it became very clear that a second step is much needed. By the way, this was confirmation, because that is the reason why Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, initiated the work that we are talking about today. Executive Vice President Dombrovskis made very clear that second step was much needed. During our assessment phase, we only confirmed, but it was very, very clear to us. It became also clear that beyond what is included under the legislative level, so what we call level 1, the future directive, which I would call NFRD 2, there is a crucial need for a pragmatic regulatory level, the level 2, to foster a proper implementation and to foster comparability, faithful representation, understandability, relevance, auditability of this information. This may look like a very ambitious project, but it corresponds to a real EU momentum. And the EU momentum is also linked to an international momentum that we observe today. And therefore, there are ample opportunities for the task force and for the future standard setter to contemplate cooperations. Not all jurisdictions are putting so much emphasis in terms of public legitimacy than the EU, but there is a real momentum in many places, and that should be somehow encouraged. I have the feeling that the EU is among the jurisdictions where leadership is putting a lot of emphasis on non-financial reporting, but it's not the only one, and therefore there is need to interact. By the way, interaction is probably a key word to bear in mind. The three pillars I mentioned, legislative level, institutional level, and regulatory level, have to interact, and that's what's happening today. We have regular conversations with the Commission on the content of the directive, and they also tell us a little bit what they expect from us at standard setting level. But interaction also at international level is a key word. Second, I would like to insist quickly on the on what the task force is focusing upon. It's focusing upon the quality of non-financial or sustainability data. Quite frankly, this is the issue. You can't have for three reasons. First of all, the EU has ambitious public policies in that area. This is one of the pillars of EU policies, and therefore, and it's also a key challenge for businesses to meet the challenges of transitions. Therefore, you cannot succeed if you don't have proper data, and that's very key. And somehow you would be inverting the factors if you were not working on data, and there would be a risk of missing the target or greenwashing somehow. The second reason is that management businesses themselves need to put an emphasis on non-financial reporting. Not everything is financial, we all know that, and it's absolutely key to structure better the information that is needed for management purposes. And the third, and not the least, is the transparency and accountability of businesses, where it becomes very key to organize a proper relationship with the ecosystem of every business, be it a very close ecosystem like suppliers or customers or, of course, employees, but also with society in general. This is one of the markers of businesses in the EU under the EU quote-unquote identity. As a consequence, corporate reporting must walk on two legs. Today we have a very well-structured financial reporting leg, which is pretty mature, but the non-reporting and the non-financial reporting leg is not mature, and we need to make sure, in order to walk straight and quickly, we need to make sure that the second leg gets to an equal quality in order to walk on two legs under the coordination of the management of the brain. Third, let me finally walk with you through the key steps of our own thinking, which is reflected in the structure of our report, and which is also structuring this event. As Christian mentioned, we have 5 slots, and they in fact reflect, as I said, our thought process. The first one is we want to focus on the foundations. By foundations, we are not really talking about standard setting per se, but we are talking about what is fundamental and what differentiates in the EU the standard setting. So as you will see, you have 2 overarching principles and 5 building blocks that we consider need to be considered, that we think should be considered when we move forward. The second element is that any standard setter, it might look a bit cryptic, but we need to transform concepts into a conceptual framework and into operational guidelines. So there are 5 areas where we consider that the standard setter should focus and develop guidelines in order to develop the standards properly. The third element, of course, is maybe the one that is most crucial. It is the architecture, the reporting areas, the topics to be covered. Unlike financial information, which has a clear target, balance sheet, profit and loss, notes to the accounts, cash flow statements, and a clear perimeter because you are reflecting monetary transactions. Unlike this, you have to define a perimeter. You have to make it as comprehensive as possible and as coherent as possible, when in fact you don't have the unifying factor of monetary measurement. So that's a key element. The fourth one is, of course, a key element of standard setting. What is the presentation for the information? So you need to concentrate on the reporting structure, and if you can start thinking about digitization from day one, you would be a lot better off. And finally, and you will see this is more open because we are discussing this at the moment at task force level, you have to discuss priorities because it's a long-term, medium-term project. You are not going to deliver this very quickly, but you need first crucial steps, probably as early as 2023 or 2024. So a lot of effort is needed to go to that first batch of standards under the framework to be adopted at this legislative level. So the roadmap is of crucial importance, and also the cooperation with international initiatives in order not to reinvent the wheel and to organize a two-way traffic between the EU and the international initiatives, because EU has also a role to play in the global development of standards. So I wish you a very good outreach event, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you for this introduction. If I may just give one question to you before you part from today's event, because I know you have a busy schedule. If you just look on the work done so far, what would be your primary takeaway on the process we've been through so far? I mean, the audience haven't been part of the process. We have had a very steep process and learning curve in gathering things. But what would be your key takeaway, and also the key message from that you would convey to the audience?
Okay. Well, the key takeaway for me is as follows. This outreach is about standards. Of course, it is linked to level 1, so to the future directive, and there is always a temptation to consider these matters. But at the moment, we are contemplating how to move forward under a directive that is not finalized yet. So that's one of the difficulties that we met, and that's one of the difficulties of this outreach event, because of course there is a temptation to say more about level 1, but this is in the hands of, the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament. Of course, we have interaction. The other point is that we shouldn't rush. I mentioned the urgency. We've not been asked to go as far as, proposing a list of indicators, for instance. That would be the first step to be conducted under the standard setting per se. Now we are in the preparatory work phase. So, my key message is that we have to navigate, and sometimes it looks a bit high level, but it's very important on the premises to be taken on board when standard setting. Standard setting is as you know, Christian, and the task force, I've been the senior partner of an audit and consulting firm in the past for a number of years, and I turned standard setter at the end of my professional career. So I discovered also that standard setting is a technique. So please take on board the technical aspects of standard setting. And of course, you are passionate about what will be in level 1. You would like to know what would be the first standards and what would be the content of those standards. It's a bit too early. I promise that if we move forward, there will be a lot to discuss in the future month. Maybe not by me, but by the organization that will be put in place.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you for that introduction. I mean, if this would have been a physical meeting, I would ask for a round of applause, but you will have a silent applause. That is one of the burdens of the current environment. So if we just then reflect back on who's actually listening in today, I don't know whether the polling results is going to get on screen, but I can see that it is of special interest, if I may put it that way, to the audit profession. If we look on the number of audit professionals listening in, they're around about 20%. But I have to say there's a good spread between preparers, users, financial institutions, regulators, trade unions we have as well, some academia. So at least for you in the audience, there are a lot of different interests represented in the audience. And your way of being able to interact is not only by answering some of the polling questions that will come out, you are also able to send in questions through the chat. It is at the bottom of your screen. What will happen when you send in a question is that they will be collected by one of our colleagues from the moderating team. She will try to group them so they will be posed to us as moderators at the appropriate time, so they will be fed into the dialogue at the appropriate themes. If we are flooded with questions, and of course I hope that you are a very active audience, so that I do ask you to send in questions. If we cannot answer all of the questions now, they will definitely go into our reflection work. We will collect them. We will send them as well forward to the central team. We may not guarantee that we can answer you back directly in writing, but your concerns in terms of questions will be taken on board and reflected. We will, however, try to meet as many of the questions as possible. The debate in the themes is going to be structured with a way that first we're going to introduce the theme. Then there will be a few panelists that have sort of what I would call initial reactions. And following that, we go into an engaged dialogue with both the panel and with the questions we will receive from you. Our guide is more or less to have half an hour or 25 minutes per theme. But as I said, we're going to be flexible. We expect to have a break around 10:40, but it will depend on where we are in terms of the themes. But there will be a break somewhere in the middle, not at a fixed time at the moment. If we could just go to the slide with the panelists, because you've seen the moderators already, we've welcomed them. But if we go to the slide with the panelists, we have tried to ensure both sort of a diversity in terms of geographical background and professional background in the panel. Given that this is in the midst of the reporting time, just being able to attract preparers and users in a season where everyone is bogged down by actually preparing financial statements, annual reports, sustainability reports, and reading them. We are very fortunate to have Jeppe Hoff Nielsen, Vice President and Head of Reporting from Ørsted, a Danish company. Joni Mäkitalo, that's another thing I have to tell you. I am awful at names, so bear with me when I pronounce names. But Joni Mäkitalo from Stora Enso, Director of Sustainability Reporting, and Tram Nguyen from Teknos Group, Sustainability Specialist. And maybe of special interest for you as well is that Teknos is not a listed entity, it's a non-listed entity. So they may have slightly different perspectives on certain matters. But given the scope in general of all sustainability reporting, it's a very important aspect to bring on board as well. If I then go to the right side of the panelist, we have a number of users. Marie Baumgart, Head of Sustainability Regulatory Affairs from SEB. We have Ole Bull, Senior Vice President, Environmental Social Governance from ATP. Asset manager, you may also call it, a very big institutional investor in Denmark. And then Thomas Barden Fabricius from Danske Bank, a Danish big financial institute, but I know Danske Bank covers more than just Denmark, so don't be misled or misguided by the name. It's a big Nordic bank as well. And sitting between those two groups, we have also the opportunity to have Birgitte Mogensen representing the audit profession and the Danish auditors, Danish Institute. We have a representative from the regulatory or supervisory authority by Bror Fried, the Council of Swedish Financial Reporting Supervision, and an NGO representative, if I may call you that, Jakob Fjerland from WWF, the Danish brand. I think that WWF is also a member of the project task force with the central team. But Jakob has also been involved in some of the sustainability reporting and prize awards in Denmark. So I think we have a good breadth in the panelists. So with that, I'm really looking forward to the debate. Once the panelists go on stage for the first time, they will give a very brief introduction. So I won't have a big round between all the panelists at the moment. But the first time you encounter one of the panelists, and that will be very shortly, I will ask them also just to introduce themselves very briefly so you can get a face to the name and a little bit more of the background. I think without further ado, we should go directly into theme 1. And I will hand over to Susanne Stormer, who will introduce theme 1. And Susanna, I think the floor is yours. I don't know whether you want to come here and take the podium. It's probably nicer when you do the presentation.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session again. So I will just need to get my slides. Oh, actually, I get them on paper now so that I can see them while you should have them on screen. There they go on the screen. Thank you so much. So as Patrick said, we have a number of elements that all need to be put neatly together to be woven into a coherent standard framework. And the first one is the foundation. I'm going to just briefly introduce the building blocks that we have for what we are working with in the task force, so that you get a flavor of the elements we are considering, and also the complexity of what we are discussing, what we have at hand. Because clearly, as Patrick de Cambour said, the NFRD 1 was a breakthrough in Europe in terms of legislation, but it was also found that it had some flaws, if you will, but perhaps rather to say that the NFRD 1 was created in a certain context at a certain point in time. Now we're in a different place, and those changes need to be considered for the NFRD 2. And then also drill down into the level that we are working with, which is the recommendations for the standard setting. And maybe just to say, first of all, as Patrick mentioned, we have the two legs of the financial and the so-called non-financial. And here I have to say that it can be difficult to moderate a discussion where you have a vested interest. But for sure, from my practice as a reporter, as a preparer for more than 20 years, I do have a vested interest. And one of them is I would like to see the term non-financial reporting be replaced by what we currently refer to as sustainability reporting. But that is just, my perspective. So let's just walk through each of the building blocks so that you get a flavor of what we are talking about. So the first one is the organizing principle. And what is important for us here is that we are talking about a principles-based approach, which is in contrast with what is known as a rules-based approach that you would know from, for instance, the US GAAP. So the principles-based approach is part of the European tradition. That said, there will still be rules, there will still be guidance that will be quite firm, because otherwise it won't be a standard. But it will be based on principles, and so we need to really spell out what those principles are, and we can get back to that. The second one, which is also reflected by the composition of the participants in this panel, is that what makes the European legislation unique is that it is intended to cover the interests of multiple stakeholders. And that in itself is a huge challenge, and you might refer to it as trying to square the circle. Because this is what is inherent in the double materiality concept, where we look at the risks to the business, the impact to business of what may be happening in regards to the environment, to society, but also looking at the impacts of business, the potential beneficial impacts and the potential adverse impacts of business. So here we are talking about two different lenses that we want to cover, and similarly we also want to reach out to multiple stakeholders and their different views. Then we have the 5 building blocks, and I apologize if I referred to it wrongly before. So we have these 2 overarching principles, and then we've got the 5 building blocks. So building block number 1 goes back to what Patrick referred to, namely the European momentum for sustainability reporting. And if I may add, also the momentum in regards to other legislative initiatives, such as sustainable corporate governance, mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence, and of course also the sustainable finance. So what we have discussed a lot in the task force is how do we ensure that we have alignment of the various policy initiatives, and so that reporting can be an expression of that. The next building block is how do we then address the specific challenges of financial institutions, and we will dive into that much more, considering the fact that financial institutions are users of information as well as preparers of information, and that even within financial institutions there are different roles that need to be catered for. The third building block is equally important, and we have tried to capture it also in the panel compositions, because we want to ensure that we cover not only the large listed companies this time round, but that we really include the SMEs, the wealth of companies that compose the European economy. So we need to make sure that we find a proper and a pragmatic way of including the SMEs in the landscape in a proportionate manner. Building block number 4 is about how can we foster sector-specific sustainability reporting. And by that we mean that there would be some information that is generic and some information that would need to be more granular, and where users will need to be able to compare companies within a sector. And the last one is that what also led to the evolution of sustainability reporting was a recognition that whereas financial reporting is quite mature, there are aspects of companies' performance that are not necessarily well captured by financial reporting, by what is in the books. And here we talk about the intangible value or the multi-capital aspect, again, where value can be captured by other capitals than just the financial. So those are the foundational elements that we have arrived at through the work in the project task force. So I think with that, then I will hand back to Christian, and hopefully this is all now crystal clear to everyone.
Thank you, Susanne. And even though you may say you've made it crystal clear, I'm pretty sure that there are a number of topics that is worthwhile discussing. And therefore, maybe I would like to now call the first panelist to the podium here. That would be Birgitte Mogensen from the Danish Institute. And I don't know whether you want to have your first intervention here, then we'll do it from the table afterwards. So please.
Thank you very much. I represent the Danish Institute of Auditors, and I'm chairman of the Sustainability Council in the Institute. And I am not the preparer, and I'm not the users. I'm something that is between in some way. And the foundation that Susanne just have talked about, it's good. It's really good. But something is missing. The users. Who are the users? Because the purpose of sustainability reporting is linked to who is using the reports. And I'm not talking about the affected stakeholders, but the ones who will take the report and use it for something. So I miss the users in the foundation. And I think I have one illustration. It is a little simple, but I think that makes sense in this context. One of the users is the decision user, the D user. This user read the report with the purpose to be more informed about the reporting entity because he or she has a relationship with the entity, a sort of relationship where there is an economic, financial decision to be taken. It can be an investor, it can be a supplier, it can be anybody else. But this user has an interest in the entity's financial performance and development. And this user is looking for information related to the outside-in perspective, the financial materiality. He also cares about the inside-out perspective and the impact the entity and its product have on the society, especially if the impact also in a rebound effect will hit in a longer time the company. This decision user wants to read the sustainability report together with the financial report. This user expects the same quality of information as in the financial report. That's the one. Users number 2, that's the P users. He cares about the environment, he cares about the human rights and about the sustainable development of the society. He is not focusing primarily on the entity's performance and development. He is a position user, and he has a position to read the report to find out how the entity handled its responsibility. He's looking for the inside-out perspective, and he will not read the financial report. Then there is the user number 3. That is the compliance user. This user has set up the criteria. He is not looking for information related to how the entity has processes to work appropriately with the materiality aspect, because he has decided what is material. He asks for concrete KPIs and data, and the compliance user has the power to request for reporting. He can be a powerful relationship to the entity, or he can be the authority. And of course, in some way, there is an overlap between the 3 types of users. When a bank in the coming years is the decision user of an entity's report, the bank might be helped by the compliance user because the compliance users has secured that the turnover is split in the categories of taxonomy-aligned turnover and not taxonomy-aligned turnover. But I highlight these 3 types of users because in the 5 foundation blocks, they are not included. I think the standard setting approach could be more understandable, but if it would start with a more clear identification of the typical users and their purpose of reporting. And with this in mind, I also think it will be more easy to work with the different ways of communication. The reporting structure may be of a report, of a sort of a management report. Another way is to tag data into a platform. Both are relevant, but not equal for the different users. And the non-financial reporting directive we have now, I think, is a motivation tool. So I see it. The directive motivates the entity by reporting requirements to work with sustainability. But that is not enough anymore. There is a need for information and data so the users can compare entities, make benchmarking, and do this with the data delivered directly from the entity. So therefore, the revised directive and the future standards have to push the entities to make compliance reporting. And therefore, the compliance user is very important. So it's good. Everybody is happy. But there might be some little challenge for the position users. Standards comes and they remain unchanged for a certain period. And standards have the nature that they are not flexible for change. So there might be cases where an entity meets issues raised by an NGOs and new issues or topics that are not addressed in the standard. And the entity might overlook the dialogue with the NGO because the raised issue is not in the standard. So there is a risk that the effect of dialogue may be reduced. And for the position users, there could be a challenge of actuality. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's a reflection. The last thing I will address is about materiality and complexity. There is a risk that the needed focus on data required for benchmarking and comparison will take the power. One of the most important type of users is the compliance users. The preparer's awareness of the materiality process may be dismissed because the materiality decision is moved in a certain context from the entity to the regulator. So there is a risk that some entities will mainly focus on the demand from the compliance users. And there is a risk that the majority of the content of the standards is addressed to the compliance users with many required KPIs and detailed regulation. But maybe it is not a risk, but a must, because the purpose of the revised non-financial reporting directive and the future standards will be closely linked to sustainable finance in Europe. So that might be okay. But the position users and the decision users have to take in mind that they might not be the prioritized users for the future. And with the standardization, I'm a little bit concerned, but I hope it will not be too complex. When I look at the financial reporting, it is very complex and with a high level of detailed rules. Some of the details can only be understood by the reporting experts. So the success for the new directive and the standards will be that the reports will be of value for the decision user, for the position users, and for the compliance users. And the three different types of users do not read and use the report with the same purpose. So therefore, I call for including the users in the foundation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Birgit. And I suppose in your own subtle way, you sort of try already now you have started at least the thinking, I suppose, and with some very firm positions. So maybe if I then look to Thomas Baden-Fabricius from Danske Bank. Thomas, what is your take on this?
Yes, thanks for the word, Christian. My name is Thomas Fabricius. I'm representing Danske Bank, again as a user from investment and lending perspective. I'm working as Chief ESG Analyst, and I'm also co-managing our Global Sustainable Future Equity Strategy. So a few reflections from our side. First of all, we imagine that over time, a predictable, sustainable accounting ecosystem will be developed, which will coexist in parallel and equally so with companies' financial reporting. We see EFRAG's work here as an important step in the right direction. We want to emphasize the importance of creating alignment between the demands that are put on financial institutions in taxonomy and disclosure regulations and the demands that are put on corporates. If we do not have relevant and reliable information available from the corporates, we will fail to have the foundation to make informed decisions on sustainable investments into and financing of the corporates. So quality of data, similarly to what it is for financial reporting, and the ability to compare that data among entities is absolutely crucial to avoid unintended greenwashing and can also be considered a risk factor for the banks, both in relation to their businesses, but also their credibility. Having said this, my immediate thoughts are that this ESS Foundation draft is positive, especially due to Principle 1, with the notion of a principles-based system with guidance and rules that we believe to be important also to ensure consistency. It's building block 2, especially addressing the particular challenges for financial institutions that are mentioned specifically, which we believe is important because we need to report on direct, indirect impacts through investment and lending activities, as well as building block number 3 in relation to getting SMEs included. This is really important as SMEs, as an asset in Europe alone, employs 70% of the domestic workforce. So they are very key to getting success and also getting scale. Our biggest concern relates to principle number 2, relating to the users, whereby the ground is prepared for a very broad group of users. I want to highlight also some of the things that Birgitte was mentioning here. We need to keep things fairly simple and avoid overcomplicating things. And trying to make everybody happy risks ending up in information overload and a reporting which appears to be irrelevant to all. So we miss a stronger perspective on the user making the decisions based on this type of information. And we recommend that the focus of establishing standards for non-financial reporting should be on the primary users, whereby we understand investors and lenders in particular. To challenge our thinking on dynamic materiality, for instance, due to the interplay between financial and environmental and social materiality, the double materiality, highlighting importance of addressing principal adverse impacts. Seen from our point of view, it would be beneficial to filter on what type of information is actually relevant to particular stakeholders, something which is definitely missing today. If we take a look at the principle 2 in connection with building block number 4, when it comes to our perspective as investors and lenders, we believe the NFRD could be improved by leveraging existing standards and frameworks as building blocks to establish a comprehensive and flexible system of non-financial disclosure, remaining compatible with global markets. We have seen particularly the SASB standards play a crucial role in establishing the starting point of sustainable investments and finance, in helping to understand what data is relevant for investment decision making, and as such bring non-financial information alongside financial information in, for instance, investment processes. As EU sustainability regulation is coming into action in many fronts and introducing the notion of double materiality, when envisioning the future of non-financial reporting, the NFRD, in our view, would benefit greatly from building upon the work that organizations around the world have done to enhance sustainability disclosure through regulation, market forces, etc. So the work of organizations like the GRI, the TCFD, and SASB, who are very active these days and thankfully collaborating, is vitally important as it can facilitate a foundational layer of high-quality data to support the ESG landscape. The key to unlocking the sustainable finance uptick in Europe and beyond has to include reliable, comparable, and relevant non-financial information, which is why alignment with international standards is needed. So I'm really keen to stress the role of these players in efforts to improve the NFRD going forward, since also was mentioned earlier that international interaction is crucial. My last point will be about the building block number 2. We really support the idea of specifically addressing the needs of financial institutions. If the data necessary is not available, we cannot make sustainable investment and financing decisions, and cannot disclose on our activities either. As the EU Sustainable Finance Strategy places a strong emphasis on the role of financial institutions to stimulate and accelerate sustainability transitions, we believe it's paramount that the ESS recognizes financial institutions as having specific challenges and needs, as well as ensure the timely availability of relevant sustainability data needed to meet our own disclosure requirements and foster seamless data flows. Additionally, we believe it's important that the financing perspective for banks also is taken into account. So I'll stop it there, and thank you very much for the word.
Thank you, Thomas. And already now I can see a lot of themes coming out of the discussion. For the benefit both for the panelists and the audience, the interlinkage with the international standards, we're going to take that in theme 2, but we're looking at some of the other building blocks right now. So we'll come back to the TCFD element, the global standards element in theme 2. But maybe if I could just briefly ask you back, Thomas, on your concerns around building block 2 on the financial institutions. As I understood, you said that it is important for financial institutions as user that the, if I may call it that way, the ecosystem of information that you need as a user is provided. The way the current building block is phrased, it both addresses financial institutions as the user and the preparer. if I reflect on what Birgitte said, she said that she needs or lacks the view of users. How are users built into these building blocks? If I try to combine you and Birgitte's comments, do you think it would make more sense to look on the users in the building blocks and say, yes, financial institutions have a specific need as one of the users, so that needs to be catered for sort of in the user building block? But do you see that you need to be singled out as a preparer, or would that fit better under a sector-specific preparer element? I don't know whether you understand. I mean, splitting the building block and say the financial institution use element, catering for Birgitte's comments on users as a group, and then see the preparer side under the sectoral preparer.
My immediate thought would be probably yes to this question. I think that singling it out and also making sure that as a preparer we are looking into the sector specifics, I think that would be definitely important. And I would just like to echo also what Birgitte said on that note.
Thank you. And maybe then if I turn to you, Johnny, from Stora Enso, how do you see this debate? And I mean, especially as opposed to the link between the users you're trying to address with the building blocks, the Birgitte and Thomas's comments.
Thank you, Christian. And yeah, my name is Joni Mäkitö. I'm Stora Enso, major forest product company, and lead our sustainability reporting. So very close to these questions on preparation of this data and reporting to the users. Very good point, very valid point. It's always, of course, very beneficial to define the actual users, readers, target group of your reporting. And as you know, including us, many companies prepare their reporting also bearing this in mind. Some of them may be more communication also driven. Report products are targeted and aimed for broader users of reports, including your employees and future potential employees. And then you have more maybe specific data-driven approaches to investors. I fully support the idea of clarifying this early on in this architecture. And then I also recognize very well the point by Thomas on the risk of sort of information overflow a bit if you try to please all. But on the other hand, it's then at the end of the day, it's about the materiality and I like the idea that, of course, in the long term, these two views are very much in line, and the key material topics are often regardless of the user of the report. Maybe those reflections, and of course, much will be then depending on the process going onwards. So as said in the beginning, these early days now, and how all these sector-specific questions or sector-agnostic questions will be addressed. That's really a key.
Thank you, Joni. And as I understood you, when you do prepare the report, one of the first thoughts that comes to your mind is actually who are the users we are reporting to. Is that correct to sort of put it that way and say that is a central element in your reflections?
Yes. That's true. It's a starting point of communicational effort, which reporting also is.
Thank you. And while we are having this discussion, I've asked for two polling questions to be put on screen that you can answer while we continue the discussion, both on the approach with sector-specific and sector-agnostic, and also how you best see the financial institutions. And I have a very active panel now, and that's really good. I think that Bror Fried want to comment on this, and then following Bror, I'll ask Marie to come in with a comment. So Bror Fried, if you go first.
Thank you, Christian. Can you all hear me clear and loud?
Yes.
That's good. I have basically I agree with the proposals in theme 1. However, I have one concern. I would be carefully consider including building block 5 regarding the inclusion of standards for intangible assets in the project, at least in the very initial phase. I share the view that a significant part of value creation and market capitalization is based on intangible assets and structures in the corporations. However, the area of intangibles is, from my perspective and experience, very comprehensive and involves significant challenges in respect of establishing standards for recognition and measurements, and includes a lot of judgmental decisions. So considering the present standards already in place within IFRS and also the standard setting that's ongoing within IASB, I think perhaps at this stage in the project, this building block should be considered. And rather prioritize establishing standards for existing ESG requirements under the NFRD and other regulations within the European Union. Also briefly on building block 3, I think it's important to include SMEs to a certain extent, but I just want to make sure that also, perhaps even more important, large non-listed companies are included. So we're not only looking at companies listed on different regulated markets or listed entities otherwise, but also other large private entities. They also need to be included perhaps in building block 3 in a more explicit way. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
Yes, thank you. Marie Baumgartz, Head of Sustainability Regulatory Affairs at SEB. And I wanted to add on there to building block 2, which we find very, very interesting, being a financial institution. And we, SEB, as a bank, we are both a data user and a data preparer. And this means that we are dependent on company reporting for preparing and fulfilling our own reporting obligations. So we are very positive to the project task force elaboration on a potential split in terms for data users and data preparers. And in particular, we wanted to highlight timing. Should we have the same timing or terms for reporting, we would have to go for estimates. And while estimates could be positive, and they are driving a development and used positively for many purposes, when it comes to reporting, reported data is, of course, to prefer and much better. And also from an audit or assurance perspective, we are a little bit hesitant what level of assurance we could reach or obtain if estimates would have to be used. So for us to better fulfill our reporting obligations, it will be feasible to do so when company data actually is available. So we would like to see further elaboration on that particular and potential split. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Marie. And there are a number of issues here. In terms of audit, just for the information as well for the audience, that our task force is not going to be looking into whether element is going to be audited or not, because that is going to be considered at directive level, and then following what is going to be considered at directive level, a future standard setter would then have to take that into consideration, just to ensure that is not going to be a debate for today, but now you understand why it's not going to be a debate for today. I think timing, as you raised, Marie, is very relevant. Not only financial institutions, but everyone here have, to a certain extent, to rely on information and provide information, and it has to be done at the same time. So there is definitely a timing element. I think, Tram, you want to come in also a little bit on the stakeholder element and whether it's only financial institution and listed, and since you are non-listed, I think you have a point to raise there. And following that, I'll ask, I have a question that to be asked to Birgitte, and then we are almost about to wrap up the session. But Tram, please.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Tram Nguyen from Technos Group, and as already introduced, that we are not a listed company, so we are falling in the range of large, non-listed large companies. So, and a little bit of a background company. So we have very short journey of reporting, and we started doing non-financial reporting just 3 years ago when the NFRD came into effect. And that to say that to highlight the importance of kind of inclusive of range of diversity of stakeholders, as you already addressed in Principle 2. But currently in none of the building blocks seems to kind of reflect also inclusion of stakeholders as users, and like the panelists already, earlier panelists already commented on that in terms of users, that needs to have a better definition and also more inclusive. And also the second point here is already the third panelist already commented on that we need also to explicitly mention non-listed companies somehow in the principles to recognize that the maturity of these sort of companies like ours, that we don't have very long experience in doing reports. So this kind of standard is very important for us to follow. And when we started to prepare for our reporting, we kind of had kind of an observation that most of the existing standards are really built for large listed companies. So there's really a gap in the existing standards that really built for our needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Tram. And I mean, if I try to bring some of these things together, and I'll hand over the floor to Birgitte, but I mean, as Susanne said, probably you all have vested interests here as well. And since I'm also a representative of an industry association, so I mean, I do have a prepared background, so to speak. So just for your information, I'll give that information to you just up front. It seems for me that if we look a little bit on what Birgitte said in terms of trying to look at users, that might be a way to breach both the non-financial elements and how they are or non-listed and the more broad definition of users they have. If I listen to Stora Enso, clearly they are directed the reporting not only to financials, but have a broader audience in target. But then again, if we look at the financials, we do recognize there are specific needs, especially, I mean, right now, sustainable finance is higher on the agenda. But if I look on NFRD and sustainable finance, NFRD has a broader coverage than maybe sustainable finance has at the moment. So finding a way to breach that. But Birgitte, we have received both a question around intangibles and whether intangible value contribution must be related to a future financial firm improvement in order to obtain this validation. The contribution must be validated by at least one beneficial data point. Maybe a little bit specific, but it was raised by Bo Fried also, whether it's too early now to have a dedicated building block for intangibles. So whether you could maybe just come with a point of view on how you see the intangibles, and whether there's also a timing issue that Bo Fried raised. And then you also have received a more specific question around decision users. Are they really just at the same footing as position users and compliance users, having the key goal in mind to underpin the green transition? It seems clear that decision users play the key role with regard to non-financial reporting, whether you would agree to that. So Birgitte, a response?
We try. No.
You have to, don't use the computer sound.
We are in the same room, so I think it cannot go when we use different devices in the same room. For the question about intangibles, we are discussing in the task force what is intangible, because first of all, when you talk about intangible, the reflection will be that it is intangible assets. But if you take a broader definition of intangibles and make it that the dimension that's intangible factors to create value for the company, value for in a broader context, then intangibles may be in another sort of identification and definition. So I think one of the things we have to go further in the task force and maybe in the standardization after that, that is what is intangible. And it is not only that is linked to the value of the price in the future. It might also be linked to the value of the activities in the society in the longer perspectives. So I think intangibles, it's a good word and it's a bad word in this context, but in a way it's linked to value creation, value destroyment, value relations. So in a way, I think it has to be taken very much care about the wording in this context. And the other one about the users and decision users. Well, decision users will be the investor, and in some time the decision users and the compliance user may be the same. But if the decision users is the future employees who will have an economic relationship with the company because he will be the new workers or new employees, he might not be the investors. So he will be more the decision users because he would like to decisions. And also, if you are going to talk about the value chains, if I'm a supplier to you, Christian, I will be very interested in what is your financial performance and development of your company if I are going to sell you something. So I will be a decision users in this relationship, but I will not be on compliance users because I'm not a bank. So that's different types of users. So I think we should not only think about the investor, the lenders, the financial institutions that are very important, of course, but we should also think about all other sort of relationships who are going to make some decisions. I hope you will some of the questions that is answered now.
I think you're right, Birgitte, and maybe since I've been part of the debate as well, and maybe just also for the benefit, if we follow Birgitte's route of thinking, it is a way of trying to ensure that we cover broader stakeholder groups, but we make it operational by saying what are the general characteristics of the three user groups. So it's essentially trying to build the gap between that. If we could just have the results of the polling questions on screen. I'll try to see whether I can find them on my own screen here. It seems to be fairly good support or strong support, I would say, to the sector agnostic. Generic, I would call it. I had to look it up. And then the more sector specific, having that division in terms of process. In terms of financial institutions, and I do reckon there's quite a lot of financial institutions on the call today. There seems to be a support for having them in combination. Maybe I should have made it clear that the no need for separate treatment would also cover users as financial institutions as users, and the separated out financial users as preparers in a sector-specific treatment. But my takeaway from this, and if we look on the debate here, it seems that there's definitely, when you do the reporting, you have a user perspective to start with. So that probably, as I take the advice from the panel so far, it should be somewhat reflected in the building blocks. There are issues relating to the intangibles. It's a broad topic. We could have devoted more or less an entire session on that. So we haven't focused enormously on that in this outreach, and that's fairly deliberate because it is a very broad topic. With this, I think we will go onwards to the next theme. And if I could ask Susanna again, whether you could introduce the next theme, and here we are also covering some of the international and global outreach. So please, Susanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I am, of course, like you, conscious of time, but we think it's really important that we spend the time on these very important foundational aspects, and then we will pick them up as we go in the following sections. So I'm here to introduce the operational guidelines, and again to reflect the fact that in the project task force we are more than 40 individuals representing a wealth of stakeholders and stakeholder interests, as well as very, very deep expertise in all of these areas. And one of the challenges we've had in our discussions is that we are a little bit between a rock and a hard place, because what has been said, we do not have a final NFRD2, nor do we have the explicit standard setting. So what we are doing is to recommend what standard setting should look like, taking heed of where the regulation is expected to go. And worth mentioning also is that we do have a very close dialogue with the Commission on where it's leaning. So in these operational guidelines, again, we have 5 blocks. The first one is about the alignment with the policy priorities. And what we are trying to indicate here is that we need to ensure that vertical integration and alignment of the various policy initiatives from the European Commission, from EU policy, and make sure that translates into something that is relatively simple for companies to get an overview of. And we will, of course, also seek to benchmark with the global policy priorities like the 2030 Development Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Paris Agreement. So that alignment is in number 1. The next one we have touched upon in our previous discussion, namely when we talk about the quality of information and the standards. And here, important to bear in mind that when we talk about quality of information, there are certain criteria for what defines good quality information. And we are talking about data points being quantitative and qualitative, coming back to the discussion we just lifted the veil on regarding what can be assured. And related to that is the third block on time horizons, because if anything, then where sustainability reporting differs from financial reporting is that it needs to include both the backward-looking and the forward-looking perspectives. That said, we fully appreciate in the project task force that financial reporting also is forward-looking. Companies will provide outlooks and what are the key strategic tenets. What we need here is to define what is a reasonable horizon for the forward-looking, and also to what extent can we spell out where we lean on estimates and where we have hard data. So another area of discussion where we would be keen to hear the panel's views. Levels of reporting, we have talked about the various types of organizations, but we also need to ensure a horizontal integration between what are the operations, the company as a legal entity, and what is the responsibility and the impacts throughout the value chain. And here in particular, I would like to call on comments from our panelists and also from the floor. And then the last point about double materiality, we have touched upon it. We have spent considerable time discussing these two lenses, so I will not go into detail with it here, but just to say that we believe that this could be where the European standards could be a bridge between the various initiatives, the international standards, where some are looking at financial materiality, others are looking at sustainability materiality. How do we combine them, and should we, of course? So I think that is my introduction to this second, and then I will hand back to Christian to invite the perspectives from our panelists.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I think I'll call directly on Marie Baumgart, whether you could provide or come with an initial feedback or reaction.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, first, on the policy priorities, that is most welcome, of course. So anything that could provide a holistic view and holistic approach and connect the dots. So yes, please, more on that. Then on the time horizon, I mean, backward looking, that is the current state reporting, and that is what has been reported up till now. And forward looking, I would say that that's something completely new, and it will have to be done in a certain way so that it would be possible to assure or have some kind of, I mean, internal controls to it and these kind of things. So that's a little bit, that's a question mark. Even though it's we understand the need for it, but it will definitely be something new. So some guidance on that one, absolutely. And on the levels of reporting within operational control, that is a must. And value chain, it will be a little bit similar there. So everything out of operational control will have to be clear and doable and fit for purpose. So I think these are the main input from us. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I also ask then Ole Bull from ATP, do you have a reaction and comment as well?
Yes, just some additional comments. I would like to focus on the discussion on materiality, because I think Susanne is right that on the one hand, this is a very good development that Europe's focus on this double materiality, but there's also a huge risk that we will mess things up. So for me, it's important that we keep two lenses and say, okay, we in the reporting need to report, the companies need to report on using both lenses, but these two lenses should not be made into one lens. Because by using two lenses, we can also get the input from other standards out in the world. For example, standards like TCFD, SASB, they're using one lens. GRI and so forth are using the other one. Don't end up in a situation where you do just a single lens, a new materiality concept. And I agreed on most what Marie said. Just to add a little bit on the operations versus the supply chain, I think we can actually get some guidance from the work OECD has done in this field, acknowledging that there are things that we of course need to, like companies need to take care of and report on, and other things they are more. It's more delicate that we actually have to take into account that they cannot be fully responsible for the entire supply chain. But I think they should be inspired by the work OECD has already done in this field. Thank you.
Thank you, Ole. And I mean, there are at least a few very important themes coming out here. I've asked for a few polling questions to come on screen now. Related to how you see international initiatives. Maybe for the understanding, and I think as Ole rightfully mentioned, that maybe TCFD and SASB have one lens. the challenge that we have been tasked with the project task force is essentially to try to bridge the gap of NFRD, which have a broad coverage, broad stakeholder view, and what at least that is one of the elements that we are advocating for, also to see how does that interlink with the global initiatives. But as Ole said, some of them has a smaller or more narrow focus than is within the NFRD. And that is probably what we're trying to grasp with the policy priorities. I don't know, Borfried, whether do you have any reactions or comments relating to how you see the policy priorities, EU alignment and global standards?
Thank you, Christian, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel. As said, I'm with the Council for Swedish Financial Reporting Supervision, but before that I had many years as audit partner with PwC. And the primary work for our council is the supervision of financial reporting under IFRS, but also it includes the mandatory non-financial reporting in Sweden. However, so far our supervision in this area is limited. I'm also active in ESMA and the Special Working Group on non-financial reporting and how we can harmonize and develop supervision in this area within European Economic Area. Before I comment on theme 2, I would just like to give respect to the work done by the task force and a lot of credit to bringing these themes already up to this stage at this point in time. Very good work. As for theme 2, operational guidance, I would like to stress the need for global benchmark and international interaction. From our national, but also, of course, on the ESMA perspective, we can only confirm the observations that have been made regarding the present status on sustainability reporting. We did several global standards under development and potential harmonization over time, but presently there is no common standard setting ongoing, and there's no common framework nor format for this reporting. We have, however, noted all the different major global standard setters that they are starting to align. The IFRS Foundation has started its consultations, and the Big Four accounting firms have also enhanced the efforts to reach some kind of strength and harmonization. But as said, presently there is a diversity also within the European Union, how the NFRD presently has been implemented in different local countries. So from this perspective, I find it important and needed that the European level starts building a common robust framework, and we support that work robustly. But over time, I think it's important that also the global standard setting is still borne in mind, and that looking at the Nordic and European financial investors, but also the corporations, they are investing on a global market and they are operating with global competition. So over time, there must be a global approach on this work. But as a starting initiative, we think that this European initiative is needed and could be a trigger for the consolidation of this work. So global policy priorities represent a significant reference, we believe, for sustainable development and need to be borne in mind throughout the process of developing the European standards. So that's my view on this theme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Borfried. I think we have now the results of the first polling, and I mean, much in harmony, I would say, or in sync with the panel so far. At least on the second question, there seems to be a huge support for global standards. Almost everyone saying yes, either directly or indirectly, or at least included. And also a strong support that what I would read as well, that international standards should be considered in the work here, and that the work here, if we go forward with the European standards, should also have relations back to international frameworks. So I think with the panel comments and the votes, I think there's a pretty strong message around this. Jakob, you have a comment as well to raise under this topic.
Yes, I just needed to unmute. Yes, thank you very much. And just for introduction, I'm also very happy to have the opportunity to be on this panel. I could see in the first poll on the background of the participants, there was a big 0 on NGOs, so which is a bit disappointing, but maybe also makes it a little bit more necessary that I explain why we take part in this work and are engaged from WWF's side. So I'm the conservation director in WWF in Denmark, heading our department on programs and policy engagements. I've been involved in various advisory and judging panels in Denmark related to sustainability reporting over the past years. My colleagues, as I think you also mentioned earlier, Christian, my colleagues in WWF in our European Policy Office in Brussels are engaged members of the task force for this work. So we are very much involved in the process. WWF has been involved engaged in voluntary climate action for leading companies in a number of sectors for more than a decade. We have had an increased focus on climate focus within the financial sector within the last 5-6 years. Both in Denmark and also broader in Europe, with a special focus on asset owners and institutional investors. I think this work we are broadening out to not only focusing on climate, or of course we still focus on climate, but also other environmental issues that are relevant to report on. I would say for the operational guidelines here, I would comment on 2 issues: the time horizon and the double materiality. So for the time horizon, it is extremely important or critically important for us that we include a forward-looking or develop the forward-looking perspective to be able to see you can say, this relates also to the discussion about the intangibles, which I think maybe is not the right word to use here, because these effects of these, you say, the future effects of these engagements, if we don't start having a focus on it in reporting in the companies and in the financial sector, the effects will be very tangible for society and also for the performance of companies. So we need to, it's a really a critical issue for us, and maybe the most critical of all in this process, to develop this forward-looking scenario building perspective of reporting in the sectors. We're starting it. I think there's a lot of methods and data on it for climate at the moment that many companies and financial institutions are applying already with the TCFD and other things. And we are working on developing similar tools and data sets for other areas. There's a process now for establishing the TNFD, so the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure. We are working within the Science-Based Target Network on developing standards for other environmental aspects than climate, so water, biodiversity, deforestation, and so on. So hopefully we will be able to have sets of data, access to data, and methodologies for forward-looking scenario analysis within a foreseeable time that can be applied within the reporting. So very important, and also important that the sector, and I know that there are a lot of you also on the panel and probably also the participants are engaged in some of these processes, which is very positive. I think, I'll stop there and then come in later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jakob. And I think it's very good that we have at least one that take up the baton of NGOs and also explain the needs from a broader perspective. So, I mean, you essentially managed also then to wrap up a little bit of the debate we had before, but also that to bring the perspective in, how do we build that into forward-looking and backward-looking information and the need for those. But, I mean, sitting between the forward-looking, backward-looking information and the international standards is the box on quality of information, which currently, at least that was in the outreach document that was circulated, embed principles like faithful representation, relevance, comparability, understandability, reliability into the standard setting process. And the question I'm going to pose to you, Marie, is do you see that to cover what you would be expecting of, I may call it conceptual framework, here it's called quality of information, but the sort of the guiding principles for what should be reporting? Or do you think, for instance, also concepts like auditability, whether the information produced can actually be audited, or whether, for instance, if cost or efficiency cost, like we know in SASB, should also be included in this quality of information? Do you have a view on that?
I think that these principles will be fundamental for usability of the information. If we don't get these right, and information will not be complete, so for example, completeness could also be one of these, so that you know that everything in the KPI or in the disclosure is actually 100%. And it's not, I know that I was in the TEG, for example, and some of my TEG colleagues, they have assessed completeness of Scope 1 reporting. And there were very, very few companies who reported 100% of Scope 1, for example, just as one simple fact. So I think these principles, and also connected to boundary, for example, where to draw the line for what to include in reporting. If we don't get it right, using the information and comparing will be lower. I think that we actually expect some kind of assurance, some kind of level of assurance. So assuranceability, I think, was the word that could be helpful, actually. So and then it's always a matter of how and getting it right. But that's all in your hands.
Thank you for getting that task back to us. But thank you for the point of view. And I don't know whether I may call on one of the preparers here at the panel, and maybe Joni, whether you have something to add or viewpoint in terms of some of these aspects. I mean, concepts like auditability also may limit to a certain extent the information provided, but also reflecting then back on Marie's comment, on the other hand, it is important, at least for certain information. Also with the efficiency cost, whether that is something you would like to see. So Joni, I don't know whether I can call on you to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity. Happy to comment. We at Stora Enso, we have applied reasonable assurance level for our fossil CO2 reporting since reporting for 2015, and then limited assurance for rest of our sustainability disclosures in this sort of broader sustainability report package to all stakeholders, if you like. And yes, if we think about showing, when we are talking about more integrated reporting in parallel to financial reporting, of course, the quality of information is then extremely important aspect to consider. So at least this limited assurance level, I think is something that should be looked into. Then the maturity, I think, is not backing up this higher assurance level when thinking about markets overall, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back with the results in a moment because I ask a little bit longer time for you to be able to make the polls. The two questions are fairly long. But I know that, Jakob, you may have a comment or reaction to this, and I know that there's a question coming in as well, whether cost and efficiency of data can be relevant to link the needs of a high number of NGOs into this. So I don't know, Jakob, whether you have a point of view on this.
Well, that's the perfect question, the clue for my comment, actually, because I think, it's really about the access of data, cost-effective data, but also reliable data, of course, and the how we, get to the point where we actually have that type of data. I think it's extremely important that we look at partnerships here across the different actors. I think NGOs can play a big role here, of course researchers as well, but it's extremely important that the sector, the companies and the financial institutions involve themselves actively in this process and engage and invest in building this data and not just sitting back and waiting and using as an excuse, sorry to say, well, we don't have enough reliance on data, we don't have enough broad enough data to be able to report on this in a reliable way. That's not going to be an excuse, and it's going to hit you very hard later on if you don't engage yourselves in developing these data sets and these methods of forward-looking scenarios. We are very engaged in this. For instance, we're just starting up a project in the Nordics on marine finance, trying to build up data sets and methods for financial institutions to be able to report on maritime and ocean specific data on environment and so on. And we are engaging financial institutions as partners in this. So I think there's a lot of good examples of how we can do this and how we can work constructively together on this and getting financing also from foundations and so on who are willing to and see this as a crucial development that we get these data in place.
Thank you, Jakob. And in the meantime, we actually received the results of the voting and I assume that actually the results are going for both votes are going on the screen at the same time. But if you look on the auditability question, there seems to be a strong support to including it either to a great or reasonable extent in one of the quality criteria, the criteria of auditability. So there seems to be a support to that part. And I have to stress auditability is something the standard setter can consider. Whether it should be audited and the level of assurance is something that we expect level 1 to address. And if it's not addressed in level 1, then as you have with the IFRS doesn't either ask about the level of assurance, but they produce the standards that can be assured, so to speak, or audited. On question 5, and that will be the last topic in this theme and maybe covered fairly briefly, but there seems to be a strong support to at least also focus and understand identifying relevant users when we talk about double materiality. That actually links us back to the first discussion. And bringing together sustainability material issues and financial material issues, sort of connecting that, and that will be a topic that we're going to discuss later in the theme. But I don't know, Ole, whether I could turn to you and if you see now, and if we can keep the polling results on screen, please, because I'll ask Ole, since you brought up the issue around materiality, whether you can. Whether this gives rise for you to reflections and the priorities on the votes given.
Thank you. Yes, I think it does, because I am most focused on the 50% on top. Hopefully it means that there are others that agree with me that we should keep them apart and at the same time with the response on the G question, or the G option, be of course very focused on how they are interconnected. And just to add on what I said earlier on, you could also imagine issues, for example, sustainability material issues that are not financial material issues, but where other stakeholders and actually also investors themselves think it's important that companies report on them. So if we keep on saying that issues should be both financial material and sustainability material in order to be reported, I think we will be lacking a lot of information in these reports. And also, if we try to bring these together in one concept, we will have a lot of people who've spent a lot of time trying to understand what is financial material, sustainability information, and what is societal important material. Try to make these two very different groups agree on things, and I'm sure we'll end up with throwing out a lot of the water in the bathing tub.
Thank you, Ole. I think that was actually also a very good comment and reaction maybe to end the theme, and we can remove the polling results now. Because essentially, I think what you're saying is that there are some discussions that we are going to be having, and especially when we try to bring together different user aspects and priorities. And that is not, as you said, we might throw something at each other. Hopefully we will only throw papers, and following that, which is usually good to have an exchange, then when one settles down, you find ways to find commonalities and you build on that. And I think that would be my concluding remark on this. We had a few questions also about comparability with international standards, and if some is international based and some is European based. I will relay them to the central team, and we'll make sure that that is going to be part of the debate going forward to ensure how can we weigh those two things, because that is, for me at least, a very important question to ensure comparability, also taking into account, and I think that was mentioned in one of the questions, that European companies are also global companies. And I would assume that European investors are also global investors. So there is not only the issue about comparability in Europe, but also the global comparability issue. We will move on to the next theme, theme 3, on the ESS architecture. And we will, this time, I will ask Kristina Vartiovara from our co-host from Finland, whether you could introduce the topic.
Hello, I hope everybody can hear me, and I would like to ask the slides to be put on screen now. So in this part of the webinar, we'll address questions of the reporting architecture, how these 3 layers of the architecture will interconnect with the management issues, and also with the specific reporting topics. And also we will cover the question of SMEs, how the structure, architecture will support SME work and reporting. So first, and this is a really broad topic, and in the beginning I would like to remind that the project task force didn't have and doesn't have as an aim to define the specific metrics at this stage. The goal of setting this framework right now is to see whether it really supports the reporting needs and the user needs, and if it includes all the best practices that have been identified by the project task force up till now. So if we start with the main architecture, it's suggested to be divided into 3 layers. The first layer is the sector agnostic, so not related to any sectors layer. This layer will include the disclosures and data which are mandatory for all sectors. This will also include the reporting taxonomy and will, as such, be the most important part for the digital, further also the taxonomy. And then we go to the sector-specific layer, which means that based on NACE sectors, which are about roughly 70 sectors, are the same as the green taxonomy is based on. So not to mix with the other sector specifications like GICS, and so on, where the same levels would roughly correspond to industries. So sector-specific layer will include disclosures and data points that are also mandatory and to be followed by all reporting entities in this specific sector. So this will include all the risks and impacts which are not covered or not enough covered by the upper sector agnostic layer. And it will complement the sector agnostic layer. And then we will also have the entity-specific layer, which each reporting entity have a possibility to define extra data points which it wants to report, as well as possibly explain why it is possibly impossible to report on specific sector or other data points for the entity. But this all has to be well grounded, so it's not a way to escape any upper layer requirements. Then we go to the next slide, please, and would like to, so the project task force would like to propose that all this reporting architecture will be very closely interlinked with management, strategy, implementation, and performance measurement. So the reporting areas are defined as specific information objectives or expected content that should be disclosed. For example, currently in NFRD, there are 5 reporting areas, which are business model, policies including due diligence, outcome, principal risks and their management, and KPIs. And TCFD has 4 layers: governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. So these all areas would be closely connected with the strategy. And areas basically also mean the areas of user expectations. So what kind of areas the users can expect from the reporting. And then we also have the decision-making point, which is the management perspective or management integration of reporting, which is the preparer's approach of including all of this into the management process. So if we go to the next slide, please. We have proposed 2 different options for this reporting areas. We, in both options, have enlarged to some degree the traditional ESG definition. Of the 3 areas, environmental is the most mature area, and this is intended to be, of course, aligned with the EU green taxonomy. And the social part, which is in option 1, it means both workforce and also, to some degree, the relationships. And the general, the G, to keep the same heading letter, G, instead of governance, it's broader than traditional governance. It would include also brand communication, innovation questions, and so on. And we will also have the interconnection with the types of capital approach in order to closer link this framework to the financial reporting and capital understanding. So there will be links to natural capital, human capital, social and relationships capital, intellectual capital. Then if we look at the second approach, it's a little bit more, or second option on the next slide, it is a little bit more granular. Here the social part or the relationships part is singled out as a separate area. And the reason for this is to better emphasize the importance of various stakeholders and the relationships in terms of the company growth and the external connection. So here the people would actually mean the own personnel of the reporting entity, and relationships is the external connection and relationships. With all other or environment and organization governance part being the same. Basically, this is just a renamed version. It's another option for the name of the general or governance including part. And the same way connection also with the four types of capital. Then the last point which we would like to discuss here is the importance of SMEs and how can we make sure that the reporting areas and the whole structure is architecture is suitable for SMEs, which very much need a minimum burden for the reporting, so it will be cost efficient for them to produce sustainability reports. And also to be enough in line with what everybody else is doing, so it will be easier to collect big amounts of data for the users of this data. And also one point perhaps I would like to add also that we in this whole sector specific approach need to consider how we should reflect in the architecture the fact that companies operate in different sectors at the same time. So defining different sectors of operations and different areas of materiality is business as usual already for big companies, but specifically for SMEs, defining in which different sectors they operate and then which metrics and reporting areas from these different sectors they should consider. This is a burdensome work for SMEs, so this should also be considered with a standard setter, how to solve this question. So I will stop for the introduction here and give the floor to our moderator, Christian. Please, back to you.
Thank you, Christina. And I mean, this is really a broad topic to a certain extent. So we will try to remain focused. I'll first turn to Tram to have your comments. And while Tram, just for your information, while you're speaking, we'll ask for a polling around the SME or non-listed issues around how we address them as well. So Tram, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian. So first of all, I'd like to make a general comment that the overall structure, the architects with 3 layers, it's quite relevant and it makes sense as reflecting to our case. So basically on the sector agnostic and sector specific, it would really helpful for us to understand what are the mandatory requirements on the disclosures, and why it's also providing some flexibility on the entity specific disclosures that companies can really choose to engage based on the materiality of their own characteristic of the companies. So totally support of the overall structure. Second point, I wanted to focus on the entity structure as a whole on the second slide. So in terms of strategy, or the first pillar in the second slide, so reporting on the strategy as a whole, we recognize at the moment that is kind of some sort of a need of organization to report on kind of the link of values creation and also impacts in the strategy of the company. So if it makes sense or kind of for standard setting to set some sort of kind of overview frameworks for companies how to report on strategy that link to value creation and impacts, that would really kind of helpful for organizations like us. And first of all, because when we start reading different non-financial reports or sustainability reports, you can easily kind of get lost in the details when you look into the indicators to the topics or subtopics. So it would be really helpful for organization to kind of describe on an overall level how their business model, how their strategy is really creating the overall value for society or the impacts to the society. And the second reason for that is also that currently we also recognize the kind of this is reflecting to the materiality of organizations who does not have long experience on reporting. So the idea of reporting on both positive and negative impacts are still very kind of new for this kind of organizations, especially reporting on negative impacts. So usually there's a lot of reports seem to kind of pick and choose to highlight the positive impacts of the organization. So it's maybe not really reflecting the good balance of the reports in terms of both positive and negative impacts. So having this kind of standards or kind of describe framework for this type of organization would also support them to shift a little bit the mindset and also kind of driving transparency in reporting for this kind of organizations. So that is really kind of two things that I wanted to raise from the first reaction or reflection from the proposal.
So thank you very much, Tram. And for me, it seems like there's no need for a long discussion about whether the three-layer makes sense. Probably, and that's based on one of the questions, is more a challenge on when you operationalize the three layers, what goes into the first layer and what goes into the second layer, also from a standard setting perspective, may be a challenge, but conceptually it seems like there is support. I mean, you also voice support now, and I think we also had that debate more or less in the first theme that there seemed to be an acceptance of sector agnostic and sector specific. So probably we were not going to have a long debate on that part, but more focus on the second element you raised, Tram, on the strategic part. I don't know, however, before we delve into that, whether I could ask Marie, whether you have some reactions or comments as well to this theme?
Yes, first on the layers on the left-hand side, I think that definitely makes sense, and it seemed to be quite similar or a little bit similar to what GRI has said before, so it definitely builds on current practices with like standard disclosures and additional or well, they have had various names across the different standards from G3, 4 and the standards and so on, but that sounds very reasonable. On the entity specific level, it would be good with some examples for understanding better what that actually could be. So I think that's a little bit early to say, but it's quite likely that there will be needed some kind of more open end or entity level, some more flexibility, and I would see that in that bucket. Then on the right-hand side, on the reporting areas, we feel that going from NFRD's A to E, having 5 areas to proposing 3 high-level areas, I mean strategy, implementation, and measurement. That sounds positive from a usability perspective, so that sounds quite appealing and easier to use, perhaps. And then the 5 areas are, of course, vital, so they will anyhow be kind of included in there. And then on topics and subtopics, I think that, or we believe that on the relationship box, that would probably need a lot more discussion, and that is what we kind of expect on the road ahead.
Thank you. Maybe just to wrap up in terms of the 3 layers, and also just to look at the points raised by Tram, if we could get the results on the SME voting, because I think it's somewhat relevant in this context. And I mean, there seems to be a very strong support to providing a scaled down version, and the other sort of alternatives that seems to be getting votes is either provide reporting disclosures topic areas, and that's, I mean, if you provide a scaled down version, you also then would provide some of the building blocks that you could make use of. So C could cover D as well, and guidance as well. And I think that brings and supports what Tram said, that especially for SMEs or new reporters in the area, having guidance, having a comprehensive standard that they can, or cookbook, or whatever you may call it, cookbook, I think it's probably simplified, would make sense, but also important to understand and respect the complexity of businesses. So I think that would be the wrap up in terms of at least the 3 layers, and confirm what I think Tram raised. If we then go down and focus on the especially the second theme that Marie raised at the moment in terms of linking to strategy and management approach, but then also maybe going forward into the 3 or 4 blocks. Jeppe, I don't know whether you have a comment or reaction or viewpoint in this. I'm pretty sure you have a viewpoint.
Yes, sure. Also quickly, I fully support the 3 layers. So let's put that aside. I mean, a general comment for me as a preparer, and sorry for not introducing myself, but I'm from Ørsted, and we are a fairly large renewable energy electricity generator. I'm responsible for our annual report, from our ESG performance report, and also for the internal reporting to our management and board of directors, where we report in a combined way of both financial and related non-financial data. And we also work very closely together with the sustainability department. But with regards to how it should be implemented into our reporting, I would like a lot of flexibility. So whether it's option 1 or 2 on how we should report the data, it's not that important for me, but it would be very nice if we get the same way that we all do it. But once we have a setup, it's good for me to kind of provide all the data in a structured way. And I would like to have a lot of the raw data in a separate section of a report. But then when coming to how to talk about it, describe it across strategy, governance, how we are progressing according to our targets, etc., I would like a lot of flexibility to put it wherever I would like it in our reporting. Thank you.
And maybe a question a little bit back, also reflecting in terms of the international comparability that was previously talked about. I don't know whether I can start by asking you, Jeppe, but also maybe 1 or 2 other in the panel can reflect on this. But I mean, is it important for you that whether we have 3 or 4 columns, that is aligned with the approach and thinking globally? or do you believe that we should first of all focus on what is the relevant structure from a European side, and then see how does that fit then into the global context? I mean, essentially I'm asking, should Europe be the leader here, or should we try to convey the international convergence? I mean, and then take the route together with other global initiatives.
I think it makes a lot of sense to try and coordinate across the globe, but who should take the first step? I don't know. I can see that we spend a lot of time on trying to figure out which reporting frameworks we should follow, and as long as there are 10 or more, it's very difficult. So the big five going together and trying to align a bit on what they would like us as preparers to report on, I think that's a good initiative.
Thank you. And yes, someone has to lead at the end of the day. But as you mentioned, I think it's a good initiative as well, and that has been considered as well in the task force. The intent to work together by some of the major frameworks out there at the moment, including TCFD and SASB and integrated reporting. And I think we also had a question around the IFRS trustee initiative, and that's definitely something that has been considered and is being considered in the task force. The question is how to align it and bring it into the context, but we have had that discussion. We had a question specifically linked to some of the ESMA guidance and what they are looking on at NFRD, and maybe the short answer at the moment is that we are not necessarily looking at the entire NFRD. That's something the Commission is looking at. We have been tasked with elements of the NFRD or being tasked with the standard in the project task force. But I mean, we do try to cover relevant material that is published to the extent that we can manage, also up to January, end of January. In terms of the SME topics, I can see that Jakob, you maybe have a reaction or comment related to the SMEs.
Yes, it was just a quick reflection also on the results of the polling. I think, I mean, the SMEs is a very broad category that basically covers 99.8% of all companies, entities in Europe. So maybe it would be an idea, and what we would recommend is that we look at it a little bit more nuanced and include the medium-sized companies in these requirements, at least in the high-risk sectors. So the medium-sized, meaning from 50 to 249 employees, because that will increase the scope also for some of the companies that have the resources and can quite easily do this together with the larger companies. So a suggestion for looking a little bit more nuanced on the SME category.
Thank you very much. So essentially, I mean, we had some views on whether 3 or 4 on how to look at the relationship. I think that the poll has now been sent to you, so you can answer and give your response in the audience. So essentially, just bear with me while I go through my notes here. And I mean, that is one of the key topics we have to discuss here. And I mean, we heard from Jeppe and we've heard from Tram mostly, and Marie has intervened as well on the user side. But I don't know whether you have any comment or reaction or how you look at this from the supervisory side.
Well, I think from the supervisory side, we are basically favoring the development that it needs to be a framework that enables, in the first place, assurance. So the standards need to be assurable, as discussed, and they have to be presented in a framework that is comparative but also auditable in order to, in the next stage, enable supervision and, if needed, also enforcement. And I think commenting just quickly on the ESMA, question here. Perhaps it was the consultation that Smes made and reported on it to European Commission in respect of developing the new NFRD. And in that report is also stressed the need for further harmonization, standardization, and also auditable information. So that would be a comment. And on the options, I would think from a preparer's perspective, with my experience on that side, the option 2 would probably, from my understanding, be easier to prepare. And that if it's easier to prepare, it's also easier to audit and in the long run also to supervise. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have the results now on the voting as well, so we can, seems to be an equal one or a dead end. So dead end is not to the extent that it's not relevant, but there seems to be a balanced approach to yes and no, and a lot of people that still think. I would take 40% saying I don't know as a reflection that it is actually a very principal issue that needs to be reflected further on. So it's not I don't know to the extent that it's not relevant, but rather that it's a very it is a complicated question that maybe needs to be reflected further on. So I don't think we get a clear steer on this one, and that by itself is a good message, I think. I would like then to have the final point in the debate. I mean, there was in the bottom, when you look on option 1 and option 2, possible compatibility with a multi-capital approach. And for me, one of the questions is also, is that something that should be looked into now, or should it be a longer-term vision? And maybe if I could ask you, Ole, whether you have a comment or reaction to that.
I can do it very quickly. I think it should be a longer-term vision. And the reason behind that is that we can already see now that discussions on SMEs, will they be able to do these things? We also have other new things going on with double standards of materiality and so forth. So also adding this into the work, I think we will have problems in succeeding.
Thank you very much, Ole. And in the interest of time, because I mean, this is also a lot of these topics can bring very long debates. I will close the theme now. We will take a short 5-minute recess before we go on to theme 4. And just for your information, we still expect to finish on time, so we will be fairly focused, especially when we come down to theme 5. So a short 5-minute recess before we start again. Ikke om vi er online igen. So welcome back. Welcome back from this short break. We will now try to take you through the last two themes and the wrap-up. I have Birgitte next to me. She will introduce theme 4, and after that, we will hand over to Christina to do the moderation. So, Birgitte.
Thank you very much. The theme 4 is very much about the reporting structure. And one of the things that we have been discussed a lot in the task force is about the interconnectivity from the financial report to the sustainability report and the other way around. And we are at the moment in a way where we are discussing that something is directly connected and something is indirect connected. And when we are talking about direct connectivity between financial reporting and sustainable reporting, we have the standing point that I am in the financial reporting, I am in the bookkeeping system, I am in the ledger, and there is some financial economic items that can be addressed in a broader context. And for instance, if you are looking about the training cost, that's a financial economic item, and it can be used in the sustainability report not only to address the amount or the cost and how many people, employees have been trained, but more about can we use those financial items to explain broader what is the impact of using this cost in this example. And that may be the outcome and the impact on the people that have been trained, on the entity, and in a broader context that people are trained more in some ways. So it's to use the financial items in a broader context. That's the direct connectivity. Then we have the indirect connectivity, and then I go out of the booking system and the ledger of the company, and then we are talking more about something that is outside the booking system. That might be scenarios in the climate change or things that have an impact on the financial report and the financial impact as well, but it is outside and can push to the financial development. So that's a way of trying to address what is connected and what is not connected directive. That's one of the things that we have are working on now. It's not easy, but I think it's very important for the future. And then there is another discussion and another issues in this theme, and that's where should the report be? Should it be a part of the management report? Should it be a standalone report? Should it be more in taxonomy, and it should be XBRL taxonomy? And I think let's go back to the users as well, and also the preparers, but especially what is the information and the data used for, and what will be the most relevant way to address the reporting structure. And there might be different way of looking at that. So that's some of the things that is the most important in this theme. And with this in mind, I think I will give the word to Christina.
Okay, thank you, Birgitte, for the short introduction. We will go directly to the comments from the panelists. And I would ask Jeppe Hoff from Ørsted to make your first comment.
Sure, and I will address the reporting structure most. First of all, I would like to say that I agree very much with what Birgitte and Ole said some hours ago, I think it is now, about how focus is in all of this, because I deeply believe that we should avoid creating a monster here, a monster reporting of 300 to 400 pages potentially if we try to put all of this information for the non-financial area together with the financial area. I think we should end up with some products that are focused towards the end users that are looking at it. So with regards to reporting, I'm fully okay with getting a lot of guidelines or specific requirements for what we should report on. But as I said before the break, I like a lot of flexibility with regards to how we report it. So in Ørsted, we actually have 3 reports covering this. We have the annual report where we first of foremost focus on the business strategy. That is to some extent supported or fully aligned with non-financial targets. So we have for emissions, for instance, that we want to bring down. So that's fully integrated into that. We also have a sustainability report where we could focus on, let's say, water and waste, but it's not directly important to the achievement of our business strategy. It's still important, especially maybe for NGOs or other user groups, but not for the business strategy as such. And then we have chosen to have a separate report where we put all of our ESG data, and that works as a backbone both for the non-financial data we have in the annual report and the sustainability report. And in that way, and then it has a bit more for whatever we know from our investors or the stakeholders that they are looking into. So in that way, we have found a way that I think works very well for us, and which I think still supports the primary focus of these reports, namely the specific users we address them to. And I think maybe if we can apply XBRL on top of it to capture relevant points from both the annual report, sustainability report, and ESG performance report into some kind of structured setup, then maybe that could be the glue that could tie it all together.
Thank you, Jeppe. Very insightful, and indeed we have multiple reporting system at the moment, and I think also to hear your opinion, Joni Mäkitalo from Stora Enso, how do you feel about this question?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm representing here same view with you, Jeppe Nielsen, and couldn't agree more really. So I think the focused approach should be really a priority, as well as the flexibility is something that I think links then to these other questions on taxonomy and maybe how to link from these upcoming standards to existing disclosures. Stora Enso has been one of the, well, one can say forerunners or very experienced reporter, at least on sustainability topics. So first environmental reports, externally assured environmental reports go back to 90s, and we have prepared externally assured sustainability reports for almost 20 years before I joined the company. And so we have done much of this on voluntary basis. And then when the directive, non-financial reporting directive came, I think if it brought any challenge, the challenge was that how to sort of build that on the top of the existing disclosures and the reporting concept. And then we have, of course, our statutory report of board of directors as part of the financial report, where we show and have part of the disclosures. And then we have this broader sustainability report talking to broader group of stakeholders, as was discussed in the beginning of the webinar as well. The interaction, they mentioned flexibility by Jeppe Nielsen, and I think one option could be to take this as a sort of index or taxonomy approach where you have the standards and then you can from that index link to different locations in your report, like we do with the GRI and are planning to do with SASB standards. So we have those standards in a content index, and then in that index we show where in our reporting we have that specific disclosure. So that's good. That could be one of the ways onward here. One interesting thing is then due to the connection with financial reporting. I think also that priority should be on achieving comparable disclosures on the environmental and social topics, governance, relationships, which were mentioned. That's probably okay also, depending then on the final context, but not so much on the financial connectivity at that stage. So I would regard it as a second priority, because I guess the challenge already today is to achieve that comparability with basic sustainability information. Other thing related to that is that this indirect connection with financial reporting, meaning how sustainability topics are driving financial performance, those might be sometimes not that straightforward. So it may, especially if they are linked to reputational aspects, for example, so there is no sort of standardized ways to quantify those. So it just may make this complex. So that's relates to the maturity of things also as of today. We of course have much of our sustainability information as part of the risk disclosure and how financial risks are related to sustainability topics, so that connection could be recognized, perhaps, although it's maybe not the priority, but anyway, very important aspect, and that links then to earlier discussed forward-looking statements, of course, and mentioned scenario or use of scenario tools.
Yes, thank you very much, Joni, for raising the very important point also regarding the risks, which, as you mentioned, might not be always the priority for the preparer, but then if we look at the financial institutions, then this is of very high importance and of growing importance, of course, to be able to estimate and measure also in monetary terms the risks. So a very valuable and very complex point also to address. We have two more supplementary comments, and then I will ask also Ole to make a short user comment. So please, Thomas Baden-Fabricius from Danske Bank.
Yes, thank you very much. So I share very much the same view that Jeppe already alluded to, especially with the focused approach being the way forward. What we want to avoid, obviously, as investors and lenders, is to have to drill through huge reports. So it's very important for us to, in the financial reports, to be able to see what are material ESG factors actually impacting the enterprise value creation. And here I believe that we already have brilliant frameworks like the SASB, the TCFD, that are looking at the material topics and how they may influence the cost of capital, the expenses and revenues, etc. Where I think the interplay is important from the financial reporting to the sustainability reporting is especially in the interplay in the materiality process and the matrices, being able to see what are sort of the year-over-year changes in materiality, both from a broad stakeholder perspective, and then also in terms of how it actually affects the business. So generally tend to agree that there should be cohesion between the financial and non-financial. We want to have separate sustainability reports still, since I don't believe that we are really at a mature level yet to include everything in the same in the same reports. So we would dislike having everything in the management review in the financial reporting. Having said this, I think also having a well-functioning EU ESG register for non-financial information based on a reporting taxonomy where it's a digital setup. So the XBRL is something that we also believe from a user perspective could be worth investigating and getting right to begin with. Then on the sustainable finance disclosures, considering the SFDR and the EU taxonomy reporting requirements, that they are also prioritized in terms of reporting, and they are made separately clear, it's very important for us to have that interconnection here as well.
Thank you, Thomas. Next, we have Jacob from WWF, please.
Yes, sorry. I think I will, in conscious of time, I think I've given my points that are relevant also to this discussion earlier. So I will pass on the word to others. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. So Ole, you mentioned you have a small comment on
It's just a quick remarks, and just to make sure, I fully agree with the preparers that they should have flexibility, but could there be a strict obligatory thing you have to fill out where you can actually, as a user, see, okay, this part of the regulation, read it here, this part of the regulation, read it here, and so forth. Imagine that we are not only looking on one or two reports, we may be looking at hundreds of reports, and therefore it's just making it easier for us as users. And of course, you can then have the flexibility as long as we can find the information.
Okay, thank you, Ole. And Jeppe, please, you have a comment?
Yes, Ole, we are actually looking into that and will make that link as part of our dedicated ESG performance report. So we will link to whatever data we have related to TCFD, to the World Economic Forum, to SASB, and whatever relevant reporting frameworks we have. So I think that's a good idea, and we are implementing it already this year.
Thank you, Jeppe. So in consideration of timing, we are now not taking questions from the audience, but we will definitely address them within the PTF work. To briefly wrap up the session, I can possibly say that the idea of integrated reporting in terms of including everything in one management report didn't receive very strong support because of the specificities of the non-financial data and the difficulty of combining or linking it with the financial data, which is of importance, but perhaps at some little later stage. And so we will put a lot of effort and our hopes into the digitization and linking of different reports and providing the data hopefully in the ESG data bank, which creation of which is discussed in the EU. So all our hopes to digitization and linking and tagging. This is my takeaway. So back to you, Christian, and part of our webinar, the final one.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for this discussion. I'll immediately hand over the floor to Susanna and ask her to take the stage here, because she will briefly take us through the priorities and before we pass on to the wrap-up. But Susanna, you will take us briefly through theme 5 and
Yes, I will. Thank you for that, Christian. And the reason we can do it relatively briefly is actually that we have covered a lot of it already in the discussion. We really wanted to thank everyone for the richness of the discussion and also the many perspectives that you have brought to the table. So just to say that we also realize that the work of the project task force is not nearly done yet, but we do have pretty tight deadlines so that we only have a few more weeks to go to finalize our work. So what I would like to do is just as we can I please have the slide for the last one with the priorities? The next one, please. This one, yeah. So what we say here is that we do appreciate that there are a number of initiatives already existing, some of which are well established, some of which have been getting traction, and some of which are new, new kids on the block, so to speak, also with strategic alliances and collaborations. What we in the project task force want to emphasize is the notion of the reciprocal input. So really to have an interchange between the European Commission, between the EU level, and the other international initiatives. You have mentioned many of them already. What we want to do is obviously to arrive at a level playing field that also works globally so that it can be seamless for companies operating out of the European Union or working domiciled in Europe. So what I would actually like to do is to first invite for the poll on what should be the priorities for the next 2-3 years, and then also in the long term. And then I would like to invite each of the panelists to, if you can, in just one word or a sentence, to say what you think is the most important thing that you would like to see coming out of the initiative from the project task force. So that's one thing I'm asking you. What is the one most important thing you would like to see? And the other one is, what is the most useful of the existing initiatives, not necessarily mentioning the organizations, but what aspect of those organizations do you find most relevant? So I would like to start with Brofrid, if I may, and ask you how you see the evolution over the short term. What, if you can have your wish, what would that be, please?
Okay, thank you. As we know, the non-financial reporting directive identifies several aspects to be covered by the sustainability reporting. And that's also recognized in the two different options that were described previously. I would like to just to summarize, in 2019, the European Commission supplemented the non-binding guidelines focusing on climate change, and they also pointed at the TCFD as a reporting format that they were encouraging, even though non-binding. We have now the taxonomy regulation, which will develop technical and financial standards for how companies should disclose income, operating expenses, and capital expenses in relation to climate change impact, a climate change impact dimension, and that's effective from 2021. The European Commission has asked ESMA to give advice how KPIs should be developed for this reporting. So here we have a very strong interconnection between the financial and the non-financial, or it's going in the interconnection dimension. And we know, we are all aware of that users of financial and non-financial information on global capital markets are expecting a lot more transparency and standardized reporting related to climate change. This is not disregarding the other ESG factors, but for this reason, I would strongly recommend the first and a high priority to be placed on standards related to climate change issues and climate change reporting requirements that are developed presently parallel within the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will hand over to Ole for a remark, but I will just give you a few seconds to reflect, Ole, because I would like to ensure that we get Jakob to just make his remarks. I know that you have a very hard deadline. We will still end at 12, but Jakob, first over to you, and then Ole is up next.
Well, just very briefly, I think it's been very interesting, and it's a very broad topic, this. So, I think I've given most of the comments here, or at least our main comments. But I think it's an extremely important process that we will be following closely also in the coming time, and try to make sure that we end at an ambitious level that can also help in making European businesses sustainable and fit for the future.
So make Europe great again, is that it?
Well, I don't think I'll use that phrase.
So Ole, what are your golden remarks on the priorities? Please.
First, actually, I think you've done a great job. That is the most important thing for me to say. One thing I think from a user perspective, we should also bear in mind, and which hasn't been mentioned today, we have had the privilege of speaking to some of the very, very good preparers out there. But from a user perspective, it's actually more interesting to get the laggards up to a certain level than make the leaders be even better, because they will be even better with or without EU regulation. So a certain focus on what can we do when it also at some stage comes to implementation to make sure laggards are also part of this for real. That will be my last words. Thank you. And thank you for being part of it.
Very good comment. Thank you so much. So if I now call upon you in a random order, then you can be a little bit nervous these last few minutes. Thomas, what would be your words of advice to the project task force?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think certainly already the work that has been done, big cadeau for this work. I think what is important in taking this forward is especially trying to align with what the big five, the international organizations, are already trying to do. Make sure that there's strong collaboration here, so that we don't end up having a lot of different frameworks that we need to adhere to, or we suddenly need to change it all along in a few years' time. So that's very important. In terms of also making sure that the laggards are, as Ole also alluded to, being supported in their transition towards a brighter future. I think it's important that we sort of consider this negative externalities view, where I believe that by coming up with universal ESG KPIs, I actually think the Future Fit Foundation has done a good job in trying to look at the sort of break-even goals. How do we make sure that companies, they reduce their negative externalities? And this is especially by making sure that they do report and monitor on the universal ESG KPIs. That also, as for us as society in broad terms, is important that they are being formalized.
Thank you very much. And that was yet another initiative that you brought up. Thank you for that. If I then take it to Joni as a preparer, what would be your wish for priorities for the medium and longer term?
I think I agree very much with the previous speakers, and building on those comments, basically the realism in this standard setting, I would highlight that. And as was said, there are a lot of. I'm also representing a company that has invested a lot in this area and has recognized sustainability as a strategic important area for quite a long time. But then in the EU we could, and this project could achieve this sort of minimum level and bring the whole market onwards, whole private sector onwards on sustainable development, and then voluntary approaches can build on that.
So the global level playing field is important for you.
That's also of course, and we have other development and we have investors of course in outside of Europe, and SASP is something that is serving that user group also, and then we have a recent development IFRS, so all that should be of course taken closely into account. But I think all that boils down, in my view, to the as simple as possible, as focused as possible to get that right. That would be a big step onwards, not to take too big cake at once, so to say.
Right. Thank you for that. And we can just recap on the poll, and then after that, I will ask Tram and Marie for their concluding perspectives. So maybe unsurprisingly in the poll, if we can just get it on the screen, we have 78%.
I think the numbers have moved since the game.
The numbers have moved, so it's actually gone down a little bit. But still, the priority is for a coherent first set of requirements. And then, of course, what still remains is what would those requirements be? What would they look like? And maybe I can use that as a segue to then say to you, Tram, what would be the, from your perspective, because we've talked a lot of the user perspective, the user needs for information. But I wanted to also at least give an opportunity to say, from a preparer perspective, what information would be most important, useful, and relevant for you to provide. So in other words, by being required to report it, you would also know better. So from your perspective, what would be the most important disclosures to develop in the medium and longer term?
Yes. So thank you for the questions. And actually, I don't have an immediate answer in terms of what is the most important or kind of highest priority in terms of disclosure or data points. But from Tekno's point of view, our first reaction when thinking about is having the possible European standards for non-financial reporting was that we are fully supporting to have this kind of standards, because when reading the NFRD and also the non-binding guidelines, it was very confusing for us to really understand what does it mean by being compliant with NFRD. So having this set of standards and also understanding kind of the first set of requirements or the minimum mandatory requirements of disclosures would help us to get some clarity in kind of what does it mean by being compliant. And I also fully support kind of on a point of view that kind of to what extent the mandatory requirement is. So definitely not trying to make it overcomplicated, overcomplex, considering companies that don't have really long journey and even resources to put in reporting. So trying to keep it as simple as possible, and also allowing flexibility for different organizations that kind of they want to disclose on certain material topics that they choose to. But that's really just my conclusion from this session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Marie. And then Jeppe, just stay alert, because then I will ask you to make the very, very final words on your end. So Marie, the word to you. And
yes.
Think TV news, very brief.
Yes, very brief. I was thinking of kind of connecting the dots on the perspectives and the global goals. I mean, we haven't mentioned the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think all in all, reporting standard and reporting will make it possible to view where the market is, how well the market is aligned, and how the market is actually fulfilling the Paris Agreement and sustainable goals, global sustainable goals. So I think that would be overall something to bear in mind.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I did mention it as part of the alignment, but we haven't discussed the implications, what it means for business. So maybe that could be a segue, Jeppe, but don't feel obliged. So what would be your number one wish for reporting going forward? After all, you have to do the work.
Yes, exactly. First of all, I would like to say thanks to Ole, even though he has probably left by now. I think indirectly he said that we were doing a good job in our reporting together with the colleagues here on the webinar. So thanks for that. I think the most important for me, since we are rather mature in our reporting here, is to get kind of an alignment between all the initiatives going on. So collaboration with other initiatives outside of this specific initiative would be of importance for me. I know that you would probably have to start thinking about what you think yourself is the most relevant stuff to report on and how we should do it. But at least as this is another initiative or an update of an initiative, we would simply like to know our playing field, what we should report on, how we should structure it, etc. So I think that would be the most important for me. And then I think it might be a bit later, but I think also reporting further down the line on the whole supply chain or value chain of your company is something that is relevant. And I think of the other a number of the other panelists alluded to that as well. So I think that would be my comments.
Great. Thank you very much. And in the interest of time, I will not give the floor to Birgitte, because I'm sure that we will hear her views in the project task force work as it goes forward. So apologies to you, Birgitte, for that. I think it's time for me to hand over to Christian and Mikael to close off, and thank you all for now.
Yes, and thank you very much, Susanne. My apologies, we will have 5 to 7 minutes overrun. The two things we have left on the agenda is for Michael to do the wrap-up. I'll hand over the floor to him immediately, and then I will close the meeting, and that will be very short. So Michael, if you could wrap up what we've learned today. And Birgitte said TV news, so it's a hard task for you.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian, and thank you everyone for very good and active discussions. We have had a lot of good views and discussions around potential standards, and like Patrick de Cambour said in the beginning, that the outreach is about the standards, and so we have talked about the standards and the premises and building blocks to ensure that the right elements for a coherent set of standards can be selected. We started the discussion about the proposals related to the foundations of standards, which are built on 2 overarching principles, and then for 5 building blocks. And there was support for the sector-specific approach, and especially we discussed a lot about the users and the specific needs of different users. And Birgitte introduced the model of different users that was very illustrative, having the different users like decision user, position users, and the compliance users who have a different user needs, and therefore that is important to dig down and in depth about the user perspective and user needs for the future standard setter. We also discussed about and heard about the use on the specific needs of financial institutions and their role as both users and the preparers. We also heard about your views about further considerations of intangibles, and there seems to be a need to look more about this intangibles area and how that will be included, or whether it should be included, or what is the right wording for intangibles. We also heard about views on SMEs and the need for scalable approach for SMEs, and maybe looking the SMEs in a broader, having those medium-sized companies, but also paying attention to non-listed large companies and their needs for non-financial reporting. And then, of course, one fundamental note came from Susanne in the beginning when proposing that non-financial reporting should be changed to sustainability reporting, and I think that we are also, in terminology-wise, we are on the track. Then the operational guidelines, and there was a lot of discussion about and questions about the need to align with global standards and existing initiatives. And from double materiality perspective, we also discussed, we saw from the polling questions that the understanding and identification of relevant users is the very important part of the double materiality. And so to bring together both sustainability impacts and the financial impacts. So that's very, very important, I would say, as a conclusion. We also looked at time horizon aspect, and the importance of forward-looking information was highlighted, as well as a very strong support of the quality of information and auditability of the data. Then we move to third theme, that the architecture of the reporting, and the three layers model, starting from the sector agnostic or general to sector specific and even entity specific reporting that got support. And then we had a good discussion about the reporting model, presented model, strategy implementation and performance measurement. And we heard about, for instance, the comments regarding the importance of the business model impacts and the creation of value, the value creation and the balanced presentation of positive and negative impacts, and taking into account also the negative externalities and their impact on corporate performance. And then about the reporting structure, and it was highlighted that the connectivity between financial reporting and the non-financial reporting is very important, but it is also difficult to build, and we heard that the priority should be in the comparability of ESG disclosures, and then building or linking data points which are then easy to use, so that even though combining the non-financial and financial might be challenging, but it is important, and the right data points should be found. And in that way, the structured setup and the taxonomy, data taxonomy like XBRL could be possible solutions. We heard about report preparers, that the focused approach and the flexibility, they are important. And on the other side, the report data users, they are expecting a very structured way and data that is easy to use. And then we had a discussion about the priorities, and I took a note that the global approach and the alignment of global initiatives and standards, that is very important. And also first step to develop is to create a coherent set of requirements, and as well as simplify reporting and streamline reporting so that it is not only for foreigners but also the so-called laggards can take the first steps and develop. They have a clear path how to develop reporting and provide information that is needed, and that way. But I think that global approach was very much highlighted, and the interchange between the EU initiatives and the global players, and climate reporting was also mentioned as a very good starting point, because there is a urgent need to develop reporting on climate change impacts, and the global markets are expecting transparency on climate topic. And this makes also possible to align information to global priorities like the Paris Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you very much for very good discussion. And like mentioned earlier, that our task in the project task force is now to take the feedback that we have got from outreach, and to also listen to other outreach events that we have. We are in a second in a row. First one was yesterday, and then take all that feedback into final report that will be developed during January. But I hand over back to Christian to having the final remarks. Thank you from my side.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank our panelists for engaging in this discussion. I think they provided very valuable information. I know I'm going to take a lot of what has been said and bring that back with me and bring that into the project task force. So really, I felt that was very valuable. Thank you to you in the audience for both raising questions, for participating in the poll. My best advice is to stay engaged. I mean, we expect to report end of January, maybe start of February from the project task force. We understand that the Commission will then reflect on this, and we expect a proposal on NFRD around end of March. And that is in the hands of the Commission. If you want to learn more about that, then it's the Commission you need to direct questions to. But this is definitely going to be just another step. Right now we're taking, I wouldn't say start of a long journey, but it's part of a long journey, because the journey has started already with the first version of NFRD and even before. Thank you to the co-hosting organizations for supporting this. Finance Finland, Finance Denmark, the Danish Institute, and not at least EFRAG and the EFRAG Lab. I know EFRAG staff is working and have worked very hard to make this happen, and they continue work effortlessly to make this happen and facilitate this. So thank you very much. And with this, I'll close the meeting, and I hope that you have learned something, that you found it valuable, and I'm looking forward to the next time that we can hopefully meet, if not physically, then in cyberspace. So thank you, everyone.